South Africa sits on some of the richest mineral deposits on Earth. Yet, step above ground and you find a starkly different reality, where deep subterranean wealth exists right next door to severe poverty. This chart shows income inequality globally, measured by the Gini coefficient. South Africa consistently ranks at the very top, hovering around 0.67, a figure that places it well above the global average for wealth disparity. The end of apartheid brought political freedom, but the underlying capitalist structure stayed largely intact. Instead of dismantling the extractive model, the system integrated a new elite into it, a process political economist Patrick Bond calls the elite transition. Often, the state tries to fix this through resource nationalism, attempting to maximize government revenue from existing mines. But as Bond points out, merely taxing the extraction ignores the ecological damage and the hidden social costs borne by the surrounding communities. Achieving actual economic justice requires looking past the national balance sheet. It requires taking the power to own and control wealth and scaling it down from the state level directly to the neighborhood. Taking a larger cut of an extractive industry fails to address the roots of systemic poverty. To change the outcome, the majority must hold inherent ownership over the actual means of wealth creation. We can start at the macroeconomy. A sovereign wealth fund is a financial tool that allows a country to collect revenue from its natural resources and invest it for long-term national benefit. Norway employs this by capturing vast oil and gas revenues to shield its economy from commodity boom and bust cycles. South Africa could apply the same principle to its massive mineral royalties. Wealth flows from a central mineral hub, channeled outward to fund public services, infrastructure, and direct citizen dividends, like the Alaska Permanent Fund. To prevent diversion, this requires democratic oversight, transparent governance, and an anti-corruption mandate. While state-level funds provide macroeconomic stability, a strong national treasury does not necessarily change the daily experience of the person working the mine or the factory floor. To address the daily reality of the workforce, we have to look at the enterprise level through worker cooperatives. In a cooperative, the enterprise is owned and controlled by the employees. This removes the friction between an external corporate owner seeking to maximize profit and workers seeking fair wages and safe conditions. The Mondragon Cooperative Corporation in Spain has used this model to maintain economic viability and social equity across industrial sectors for decades. It provides a blueprint that could be adapted for South Africa's mining and manufacturing sectors. For a traditional business, ownership shares first shift to the workers. Second, operations are governed by democratic decision-making. Third, profits are shared collectively. Distributing the surplus directly to laborers addresses exploitation and ensures economic benefits remain within local communities. Yet, the industrial layer is only part of the puzzle. Securing economic sovereignty also requires extending that equity to the land and natural elements themselves. This brings us to the grassroots level and the concept of earth democracy, championed by environmental activist Dr. Vandana Shiva. Earth democracy advocates for community-based natural resource management. Instead of assigning land and water rights to distant corporations or a state bureaucracy, the rights and responsibilities are held by the people who live directly on that land. Those closest to essential resources like seeds and water possess the deepest knowledge of the local ecology, having a direct interest in keeping it healthy. When communities manage their natural heritage directly, they create sustainable practices that prioritize long-term ecological health over immediate depletion. These three components work together: a wide base of community management, a middle pillar of worker cooperatives, and a protective top tier of sovereign wealth funds. This structure distributes wealth while buffering the domestic economy against unpredictable global commodity market shocks. A localized, renewable cycle allows wealth to regenerate within the community, keeping the value of those resources circulating locally rather than flowing outward. Transitioning toward this tiered system involves navigating deep-seated institutional inertia and resisting entrenched interests. But by systematically shifting how wealth is owned and managed, these models provide a structural path toward a more stable and equitable future.
South Africa sits on over $2.5 trillion of mineral wealth.
Yeah, it's a massive number.
Right. It is quite literally one of the richest patches of dirt on planet Earth. Yet the person living right next to that staggeringly lucrative platinum mine likely, struggles to access clean drinking water.
It's a stark contrast.
It really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into a document that asks a somewhat dangerous question. What if we entirely redesign who owns the dirt?
And the document we're analyzing is called Alternative Economic Models for South Africa. It goes far beyond standard economic policy tweaks.
Yeah, this isn't just about adjusting tax brackets.
Exactly. The authors are asking us to look past the surface-level metrics like GDP and actually examine the underlying mechanics of ownership. I mean, the core premise here is challenging the assumption that a nation's natural resources naturally belong to the corporations extracting them.
Right, rather than the citizens actually living on top of them.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to figure out how a nation transitions from this extractive system to one where the majority actually benefits, we have to understand the current machinery.
We do. And we have to look at the historical context.
Right. And the source throws out a number that really puts this disparity into perspective. The Gini coefficient.
Right, so the Gini coefficient is the standard metric used by economists to measure income inequality within a given population.
And a score of 0 is perfect equality, right?
Yeah, score of 0 represents perfect equality, where every single person makes exactly the same amount. And then a score of 1 represents perfect inequality, where a single individual holds all the wealth and everyone else has absolutely nothing.
Wow, okay.
So according to the data in our sources, South Africa's Gini coefficient consistently hovers around 0.67.
0.67. I mean, to put that into context, that makes it consistently one of the most unequal societies in the world.
It really does.
It means a massive portion of the productive land and the mineral wealth is concentrated in the hands of a very, very small minority.
Yeah, and the document argues this disparity is basically the lingering architecture of racialized economic policies, policies with very deep historical roots.
Right. I mean, the end of apartheid brought monumental, world-shifting political change, obviously. But the text relies heavily on political economist Patrick Bond to argue that it didn't fundamentally alter the financial architecture.
No, it didn't. In fact, Bond calls this the elite transition.
The elite transition.
His analysis suggests that the transition to democracy, while politically revolutionary, essentially left the underlying capitalist economic structures intact.
Oh, I see.
So instead of dismantling the highly extractive nature of the economy, the transition merely integrated a new political elite into an existing, deeply unequal system.
I was trying to visualize how this works in practice. It's like, imagine a massive corporate farm where the workers are starving.
Okay, right.
The revolution comes, the old abusive managers are fired, and all the workers cheer. But then a few of the lead workers just put on the manager's suits, sit in the same corner office, and keep exporting all the food out of town while the rest of the workers stay hungry.
That is a great way to picture it.
The machinery of extraction just didn't stop. The combine harvesters are still running. It just got a new coat of paint and some new operators at the controls.
That captures Bond's critique perfectly.
Yeah.
I mean, the mechanism of wealth concentration was never dismantled. The wealth is still being pulled from the ground and funneled upward and outward.
Instead of circulating throughout the local population.
Exactly.
But, okay, if the underlying system is the problem and everyone knows these mining conglomerates are pulling billions out of the ground, I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Why can't the state just step in and tax them heavily? Like, if a company makes $10 billion, just slap an 80% tax on the royalties.
Right, take a bigger cut.
Yeah, build schools, pave roads, fund hospitals. Why isn't aggressive state revenue collection the silver bullet here?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the document addresses that exact logic. Bond actually critiques this approach, labeling it resource nationalism.
Resource nationalism. Okay, what does that mean in this context?
It occurs when a state attempts to maximize its revenue from extractive industries, so using higher taxes, bigger royalties, or aggressive export tariffs, but without altering who actually owns the resources or the means of production.
Okay, but I'm still stuck on the practical reality of a struggling town. The document even mentions grassroots movements advocating to just leave valuable fossil fuels and minerals underground.
Yes, they do.
You're telling me a local grassroots movement wants to say no thanks to a massive tax injection from a new mine? Why would anyone leave incredibly valuable resources in the dirt instead of, taxing them to fund local development?
Well, Bond explains this paradox through the concept of social reproduction blind spots.
Okay, social reproduction blind spots. That is a very dense piece of academic jargon.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
Break down what a social reproduction blind spot actually looks like on the ground.
Sure. It refers to the hidden long-term costs of extraction that a spreadsheet of tax revenue completely ignores. Think about the mechanics of a large-scale mining operation.
Okay.
They move in, and yes, they might pay a high tax rate for a decade, but during that decade, they are causing severe environmental degradation.
Right.
They're polluting local water tables with heavy metals. They are emitting vast amounts of greenhouse gases.
And impacting the health of the local workforce, I imagine.
Exactly. They're impacting the respiratory health of the people working there, and fundamentally, they are permanently depleting a non-renewable resource.
So the tax revenue might look fantastic on the national budget this quarter, but the local community is left dealing with poisoned groundwater and sick workers for the next 4 generations.
Yes, the money eventually runs out, but the environmental damage is permanent. The short-term financial gains are basically entirely offset by the irreversible ecological and societal damage. So those grassroots movements mentioned in the text, they aren't anti-development.
They're just looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. They're arguing that keeping those resources underground is the more economically responsible choice long-term. The true cost of extracting them, a cost to social reproduction, meaning the ability of a community to survive and thrive generation after generation, is simply too devastating.
So resource nationalism just skims money off the top of a highly destructive process. It doesn't actually stop the destruction.
Right. It just monetizes it.
Okay, so we can't just turn the tax dial up to fix the corporate farm. We have to change who owns the farm entirely.
We do.
And the document explores a few macro-level solutions for this, looking at national-scale models for collective ownership. It starts by analyzing socialism and communism in this context.
Yeah, the authors note that at their core, these models advocate for the direct state or collective ownership of the means of production, specifically, strategic industries like mining.
Which would stop private accumulation.
Right. The mechanism here is designed to eliminate the private accumulation of wealth entirely. In theory, all profits from these national resources are directly channeled into public services, infrastructure, and social welfare programs.
But the document includes a pretty massive caveat regarding direct state ownership.
It does.
Because looking at historical implementations globally, for this to actually benefit the public, it requires rigorous transparency and extreme democratic accountability.
Which is very hard to maintain.
Exactly. Without those structural safeguards in place, handing total control of a nation's wealth to the state runs a very high risk of simply breeding localized corruption and massive bureaucratic inefficiency.
Which is why the text introduces a different mechanism for managing national wealth. Sovereign wealth funds, or SWFs.
Sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah. These are investment funds owned by the state, designed specifically to manage resource rents for the long-term benefit of the nation's citizens.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because the document highlights 2 wildly different but highly successful blueprints for this: Norway and Alaska.
Yes, 2 great case studies.
Let's look at Norway's government pension fund Global first. They set this up to manage their vast oil and gas revenues. But their mechanism is brilliant. Instead of just dumping billions of oil dollars directly into their domestic economy, they invest it globally.
Right.
They buy stocks, bonds, and real estate outside of Norway.
And the mechanism of investing externally is absolutely crucial. By moving that capital into global markets, it acts as a massive financial shock absorber.
How so?
Well, if you flood a domestic economy with sudden oil wealth, you trigger massive inflation and distort your currency. It's an economic phenomenon often called the resource curse.
Ah, okay.
Norway avoids this entirely. Furthermore, they shield their domestic economy from the wild boom and bust volatility of commodity prices.
Right, because oil prices are always fluctuating.
Exactly. So if the global price of oil crashes tomorrow, the Norwegian economy remains stable because their national wealth is diversified across thousands of global companies.
They essentially turned a finite resource in the ground into a permanent, diversified income stream for future generations. That is so smart.
It is.
And then you have the Alaska Permanent Fund, which takes a very different approach. They take a portion of their state oil revenues and distribute it as a direct annual cash dividend to every single resident of Alaska.
It's a direct benefit sharing model.
Yeah.
But, this naturally raises a structural question.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say.
If a government is just mailing cash to every citizen annually, doesn't that risk driving up local inflation, effectively neutralizing the benefit of the dividend?
I had the exact same thought. If everyone suddenly has an extra $2,000, doesn't the price of rent just go up by $2,000?
Right.
But the document suggests that applying a hybrid of these SWF concepts to South Africa could work differently. Think of it like setting up a massive national trust fund specifically for South Africa's mineral royalties.
Okay, a hybrid model.
Yeah. Part of the fund works like Norway investing capital to build infrastructure, diversify the broader economy away from mining, and fund public goods. But another part of it acts like the Alaska model, giving a direct annual dividend to citizens.
And providing that direct dividend does something a newly paved road simply cannot do.
What's that?
It provides a tangible, mathematical sense of shared ownership. You are no longer just a passive resident living next to a corporate mine. You are a literal shareholder in the wealth of your nation.
Oh, wow.
The psychological shift from marginalized citizen to stakeholder is profound.
I mean, I have to admit, if my state government mailed me a dividend check every year based on our natural resources, I would suddenly become very, very invested in how those resources were being managed.
Absolutely. Everyone would.
But let's be real for a second. If I'm a worker on the floor of a manufacturing plant, or deep in a platinum mine, a national wealth fund sitting in a government bank account, or even an annual dividend check, it doesn't really change the brutal daily reality of my working conditions.
No, it doesn't.
So how do we actually change the power dynamics on the factory floor?
And that is the exact limitation of macro-level solutions. National funds can feel incredibly abstract to the average person.
Right.
So to address the daily reality of the worker, the document shifts focus to micro-solutions. Specifically, it examines how alternative models can localize economic power. And the primary framework they analyze here is the worker cooperative.
Okay, worker cooperatives. They completely invert the traditional employer-employee dynamic.
They really do.
The source points to the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation in Spain as the blueprint for this. And we need to be clear, this isn't just a small 10-person neighborhood bakery we're talking about.
No, not at all.
Mondragon is a massive, globally competitive network of industrial, financial, and retail enterprises. They have proven that this model can scale massively and sustain economic viability through global recessions.
Right, and the mechanism of a worker cooperative is fundamentally different from a standard corporation.
How does it work under the hood?
There are no external, distant shareholders voting on what to do with the company's profits.
Yeah.
Every worker at Mondragon gets one vote, regardless of their position.
Wow.
They elect their management, and crucially, they collectively decide how to distribute the surplus.
So if the company has a banner year, the workers vote to either reinvest it into new equipment or pay it out to themselves as bonuses.
Exactly.
The distant, wealthy shareholder who skims the profit off the top is completely eliminated from the equation.
Yes, and it changes the incentive structure during hard times, too.
Oh, that makes sense. Because in a standard corporate model, if profits dip, the first thing management does is lay off 10% of the workforce to protect the shareholder dividend.
Right. But in a cooperative, the workers might vote to temporarily cut everyone's hours by 10% so that nobody actually loses their job.
That is a huge difference. Applying that framework to historically exploitative sectors in South Africa, like large-scale agriculture or mining, that would be a radical restructuring.
It would be revolutionary.
By shifting ownership and decision-making power directly to the workers, you localize the economic benefits. The profits generated by the communities stay within the community.
Which ties perfectly into the next micro-solution. The authors highlight community-based natural resource management, or CBNRM.
CBNRM. Got it.
The underlying premise here is extremely pragmatic. The people who live closest to a natural resource usually have the deepest knowledge of its ecosystem, and they have the strongest inherent incentive to protect it.
I mean, that's just logical. If you pollute the local river, you and your children are the ones who have to drink from it. A corporate executive sitting in a boardroom 1,000 miles away does not bear the immediate physical cost of that pollution.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the broader philosophical shift the document is pushing for this is where the authors introduce the work of Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Okay.
She is a prominent environmental activist who champions a concept she calls Earth democracy.
Earth democracy.
Yeah. Dr. Shiva's philosophy argues that we must fundamentally reevaluate how we categorize essential resources. Her core economic argument is that things like seeds, clean water, and biodiversity They are our common heritage.
Right. They are the natural rights of sustenance.
Exactly. Therefore, they should not be treated as corporate commodities to be patented, enclosed, and sold back to the population for profit.
She advocates for what the text specifically calls seed and water sovereignty. I spent a lot of time trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of seed sovereignty, and the best way I can explain it is by looking at the tech world.
The tech world.
Yeah. Think of seed sovereignty like open source software.
Applying a digital framework to agriculture is actually a really helpful way to visualize the mechanism.
Right. Because in the proprietary corporate model, a massive agricultural company genetically modifies a seed. They own the code, they patent that seed, and they charge farmers a premium to use it.
And they restrict how it can be used.
Exactly. Furthermore, they often engineer those seeds so they don't reproduce naturally, forcing the farmer to buy new seeds from the corporation every single year. The farmer is locked into a subscription model just to grow basic food.
Which is incredibly extractive.
But in the open source model, which is what Earth Democracy advocates for the code, the seeds belong to the community. The community shares them, saves them from year to year, naturally crossbreeds them to adapt to their specific local climate, and sustains them together.
That's fascinating.
Nobody gets locked out of access because nobody holds a corporate patent on a basic tool of survival.
And Dr. Shiva's vision is really about reclaiming that natural heritage from corporate enclosure. It prioritizes ecological health and social equity over centralized profit. And this brings us to the necessary paradigm shift required to implement literally any of the solutions we've discussed today.
Because we've talked about macro models like sovereign wealth funds, we've looked at micro models like worker co-ops and local resource management, but none of this works in practice unless a country fundamentally changes its philosophical approach to basic human needs.
Right. The authors connect Shiva's Earth Democracy back to Patrick Bond's advocacy for the decommodification of essential services.
Decommodification.
Yeah. Bond argues that access to clean water, electricity, and basic housing must be viewed strictly as fundamental human rights, completely insulated from market forces and corporate profit motives.
Basically taking the price tag off of basic human survival. Decommodification means you don't get cut off from the water grid just because you lost your job.
Yes. The document asserts that combining these strategies, macro wealth distribution, micro-democratic empowerment, and the decommodification of basic needs would generate immense societal benefits.
It sounds ideal.
It outlines a path toward genuine, equitable wealth distribution, truly sustainable ecological practices, and deep economic resilience.
But you know, the authors don't sugarcoat the reality of this transition either. They explicitly outline the massive challenges involved. This requires navigating a highly fractured political landscape and overcoming deeply entrenched corporate interests.
It's not going to be easy.
No. The people currently wearing the manager suits at the corporate farm, the ones benefiting from the elite transition we talked about earlier, they are not going to simply hand over the keys just because a new economic paper was published.
Power concedes nothing without a demand.
Exactly.
The text frames this as a monumental crossroads. South Africa, and indeed many resource-rich nations, can continue with an economic model that the authors argue inherently perpetuates massive inequality and ecological degradation. Or it can embark on the exceptionally difficult, politically complex journey toward genuine economic democracy.
So, what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Whether you're in South Africa grappling with these specific historical legacies, or anywhere else in the world dealing with rising inequality, the core message of this document is about redefining power.
Right.
True democratic empowerment isn't just about showing up to vote for a political representative every 4 years. It means everyday people, workers on the factory floor, local residents near a mine, farmers in rural communities having a direct structural say in the economic decisions that dictate their daily lives.
It demands a shift from being a passive participant in an extractive economy, someone who merely receives wages or pays taxes, to becoming an active, sovereign owner of your community's wealth.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by diagnosing the failure of the elite transition, that realization that changing the political operators doesn't fix an inherently extractive machine.
Yes.
We explored the mechanics of why resource nationalism, just taxing the extraction, fails to account for the devastating long-term social and environmental costs. And then we dug into the actual blueprints for a new architecture.
We examined the macro-level stability provided by sovereign wealth funds, analyzing the shock-absorbing mechanisms of Norway
Yeah.
and the dividend models of Alaska.
Yep.
We explored the localized empowerment of worker cooperatives like Mondragon, where the workers control the surplus. And we delved into the profound paradigm shift of Dr. Vandana Shiva's Earth democracy and the critical need to decommodify essential human resources.
It paints a vivid, incredibly detailed picture of a potential future, a reality where a nation's immense natural wealth actually translates into a prosperous, equitable, and sustainable life for the vast majority of its people.
It really does.
It proves that the alternative to our current system isn't just some vague utopian dream. The mechanical blueprints already exist, and they're functioning in the real world right now.
And as we conclude this analysis, I want to leave you with a thought that builds on these blueprints, but pushes the boundary into our modern reality.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Dr. Vandana Shiva champions the decommodification of physical resources like seeds and water, arguing powerfully that they are our common heritage and cannot be enclosed by corporate patents.
Which, like we said, makes perfect sense for physical resources.
But if we accept the premise that essential life-sustaining resources should not be privately owned or corporatized, how might that philosophy reshape our view of newly emerging resources?
Okay.
Think about the massive oceans of digital data generated by our communities every single day. Our movements, our preferences, our interactions, that data currently fuels trillion-dollar tech monopolies.
Wow, yeah, it does.
They extract it, enclose it, and sell it for profit. Could data sovereignty, reclaiming our collective digital output as a public good, managed by the community rather than a corporation, be the next necessary frontier of Earth democracy?
Taking the open source concept of the seed and applying it directly to that algorithm, wow, that completely changes how I look at the tech landscape.
It's something to think about.
It really is. And speaking of landscapes, next time you see an image of a bustling, hyper-modern city sitting right next to an area of extreme poverty, or an incredibly wealthy mine surrounded by struggling communities, I hope you remember this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Don't just look at the new coat of paint on the walls. Start questioning who actually owns the foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, and keep questioning the structures around you.